Before an artist begins their work, they have a decision to make. Who are they creating for? Fans? Critics? Audiences? Today, too many musicians create for the wrong reasons. They create to sell, to please, to chart, to go viral. And I wouldn't call this art. Rather, it's more like business. These so-called artists package their sounds to create a product that meets the wants and needs of a target audience. And don't get me wrong, the music can be good, but it lacks a certain magic, the transcending nature of music that can only be sparked by an artist who creates purely for themselves, with nobody and nothing else in mind.
Well, I only make music for myself. It's a relation between just me and making music, and there's no other factor that interrupts it at all. So press and what anybody else says is totally irrelevant.
Well, things like I don't make music that doesn't do something to me in some shape or form. Basically, otherwise it's a waste of time. It's got to affect me in some way when I listen back to it or when I'm making it. And that's the only sort of underlying requirement of any track that I do for me.
Before Aphex Twin, electronic music was defined by repetitive 4-bar loops with robotic beats and catchy melodies. But Richard David James would never stick to this formula. He wouldn't try to create something that he thought other people would like. He created it out of his love for music. His songs would sometimes end up being beautiful, bringing us joy and pleasure, while other times, his work would challenge our perceptions and the way we listen. For years, he's left listeners perplexed, trying to understand and put meaning to his work. But the beauty of it all, and the reason why an Aphex Twin project still sounds innovative 30 years later, is because of the fact we can't fully comprehend it.
What struck you about Richard's music?
What I liked about it was that I liked it and I didn't understand it. I'm always attracted to things that I can understand. It's a fundamental aspect of curiosity. When I don't understand something, I get curious about it. And I liked his music, and I didn't know what I liked about it. I wanted to hear more of it, and I wanted to fool around with it.
His musical talent, combined with his enigmatic persona, has cemented him as some sort of myth or legend. Some even go as far as to call him an alien. But in reality, the story of Richard D. James is...
I think basically I consider myself just some kid mucking around in his bedroom. That's the way I've always seen myself. And when it comes to music, I just do whatever I feel like doing. I don't feel held down to one type of music.
I hate making music that sounds like other people. I make my music consciously different, the same way that other people make theirs sound consciously the same. Maybe the reason why artists today struggle to stay true to themselves and push boundaries the same way that artists used to is not because of them, or it isn't their fault, but it's because the way modern society is designed. We're rarely bored anymore. There's always some sort of distraction, something to keep our mind busy. But back in the 70s and 80s, before the birth of the internet, this wasn't the case for a young Richard James, a kid who grew up in Cornwall, an isolated suburb located on the southwestern tip of the United Kingdom.
Cornwall is almost an island. The River Tamar, which is the frontier, runs very nearly from coast to coast, and it comes within just a few miles of cutting the county off altogether from the rest of England. And that accounts partly for a certain insularity in some Cornish thinking.
I love it down here. It's so peaceful, but I know that after a while that wears a bit thin and you just get really bored and want to go and buy some records and go out and stuff.
But growing up in Cornwall was one of the best gifts that Richard received. Bored out of his mind, by the age of 10, he was already messing around with instruments, and by the age of 14, he had already started making his own music. But it wasn't just any kind of music. Richard was building his own custom sequencers and modifying existing analog synthesizers by taking them apart and reworking them to manufacture the sounds he wanted.
Well, I've been into machines since I was little. Any sort of toys or anything that's some sort of mechanics or electronics, always been into it, basically.
Oh, were you the guy that would take apart your tape recorders?
Yeah, that sort of person, totally. And never put them back together.
He wasn't trying to sound like anybody else. In fact, the only music he had heard around Cornwall growing up was music he didn't actually like.
Yeah, if you see what I mean. I mean, what was it that was going on locally that inspired you to take up?
Nothing, basically. That's what made me do music, I reckon. Just because there was nothing else.
Yeah.
I mean, there is some music scene, but it's nothing that I was interested in. but it's just out of boredom, really.
I could just lock myself away for days and get inspired by myself. That's my favorite way to do it. It's more like a pure form of motivation when it's all on your own. But you have to wait until you're really bored and you've got nothing to do. That's when it comes out. That's when I reckon it gets good. It wasn't until later on, listening to the radio one day, that Richard realized his music was somewhere in between acid house and techno. But ultimately, his work sounded like nothing else out there. When Richard turned 17, he started working so that he could save up some money to purchase his own musical equipment.
Musicians rarely get a hearing nationally, so the Aphex Twin's success, together with the Reflex label he set up, has inspired a new generation.
If you hadn't got into music, what would you have done?
Well, my dad's a miner. I did a bit of work in the mines as well when I was about 17 or something. That's where I got my first money to get my first equipment, really. So it sort of helped me out for music.
What was that? What was it like?
It was so hot. It's really, really hot underground.
During this time, he also was studying engineering at Cornwall College, where he got good grades, despite having his headphones on, blasting music during every lecture. Outside of his work and studies, at night, Richard lived a whole nother life. In the late 80s, illegal raves were becoming more and more common throughout Cornwall, with acid house and techno blasting through the speakers, while young rebels danced through the night in abandoned buildings, churches, open fields, or wherever they could find their next venue. Richard would often be in attendance, as he had finally found music that resonated with him. Eventually, he began to DJ these events, where other people heard his music for the very first time. Richard never intended to publicly release his music. In fact, he was even against it because his work was personal and he wanted to keep it for himself. But eventually, the pressures from friends and promoters who waved money in his face got to the point where he had no other choice. In September of 1991, Richard released his first EP under the name Aphex Twin, titled Analog Bubble Bath. The project, along with some other EPs Richard would release, gained some buzz among the electronic music scene in the UK, with the Rolling Stones describing it as a redrawing of ambient techno aesthetics. It received heavy airplay on London pirate radio stations and caught the attention of the biggest European rave label at the time, R&S Records. The majority of releases in the electronic music scene at the time were made for raves. High energy, heavy bass, the music was made for dancing. But what R&S Records and Aphex Twin would do would flip the entire genre upside down. Selected Ambient Works 85 to 92 was different. It wasn't made for the drugged up kids who were the life of the party. Rather, it was made for the kid chilling out, alone in his bedroom with headphones on, smoking on some marijuana. The project was recorded between 1985 and 1992, beginning when Richard was just 14 years old. Using homemade equipment he had constructed, as well as drum machines, he had created what some would call a masterpiece. The songs had the same elements of a traditional house or techno track: drums, bass, synths, but it was designed for a completely different environment. It was the first of its kind and came to be extremely influential, and in 1992, this new sound quickly caught on among students across the United Kingdom. Following his success, Richard moved to London, signing a deal with Warp Records. By now, fans had given this new genre a name, IDM, standing for Intelligent Dance Music. Over the next few years, Richard would work under many aliases, while also supporting some of the biggest names from Warp Records on tour. But the real question was, what was next for Aphex Twin? Being in London, Richard was now surrounded by tons of other music, but his next project, just like the last, wouldn't be influenced by anybody. It came from a place deep inside of him, in a way that you would never imagine.
The only time the Aphex Twin does sleep is as a means of inspiration. The ideas for his forthcoming triple album came from a technique called lucid dreaming.
All the tracks were like 70% of them, roughly, were done asleep and then remembered and recreated in the studio. It's quite a complicated process. I mean, it's something I've been doing, like practicing for years. And I've only recently begun to do it for the last year.
A lucid dream is a dream in which the dreamer becomes aware that they are dreaming. This awareness can range from a passive understanding that the dream is not real, to having complete control over the dream's narrative, characters, and environment. I've been able to do it since I was little. I taught myself how to do it, and it's my most precious thing. I've done everything that you can do, including talking and shagging with anyone you feel that takes your fancy. I often throw myself off skyscrapers or cliffs and zoom off right at the last minute. it, that's quite good fun. It's well realistic. Just like everything he says, we must take it with a grain of salt. We'll never know whether Richard's lucid dreaming abilities were true or not, but according to him, his lucid dreams were responsible for 70% of the music on selected Ambient Works Volume 2. Fans and critics alike were expecting something along the lines of the first selected Ambient project. Instead, they got 3 hours of warm, drifting synth pads, completely stripped of percussion. Richard even refused to name the tracks, giving them numbers rather than titles, pushing his philosophy of meaningless music to an even further extreme. Because for him, these weren't songs, they were environments from his dreams. And that's what made Saw 2 so unreal. Each track feels like its own world, moving from the soft, melancholy pieces to the suffocating, horrifying sounds of others. It's a full emotional spectrum, beautiful yet eerie at the same time. And Richard wasn't trying to please anybody with it, for if he was, he would have just made another album like the first one. At the time, Saw 2 wasn't immediately met with praise. Critics and fans were divided, and remain divided to this day. But you can't deny its brilliance, and in 2016, Pitchfork ranked it number 2 on their best 50 ambient albums of all time. Over the years, Aphex Twin would continue to defy expectations, break rules, and go against the mainstream. He would continue to make music out of his pure joy for the craft, at one point stating that he was making 4 songs a day, having enough music for 200 LPs. In the mid-90s, it started to become cool to remain mysterious and hide your identity as an artist. So for his next 2 albums, I Care Because You Do, and the Richard D. James album, Richard slapped his face on the cover with a sinister smile, eventually becoming a signature look. With his next 2 albums, Come to Daddy and Window Licker, Aphex Twin would officially reach mainstream popularity by the late 90s, but he wouldn't change who he was. He wouldn't sell out and become one of those Hollywood celebrities. The only thing that did change was now music was paying the bills, which meant he could start living the life he wanted. He purchased a tank that he drove around the streets of Cornwall, claiming that the machine gun still worked. And to go with the tank, he famously purchased an abandoned bank in London, where he lived by himself from the late 90s to the mid-2000s. It was somewhere where he could hide out and escape the hustle and bustle of the big city of London. In between traveling globally to perform at festivals worldwide, when at home, Richard claimed that no venue was too small for an Aphex Twin concert, so he would often play at random venues throughout the UK, sometimes as small as just somebody's house. On one trip to Scotland, Richard left an MP3 with 180 unreleased tracks on an airplane. I had 180 unreleased tracks on an MP3 player which I left on a plane, and I thought, they're gonna fucking come on the internet sooner or later, so I may as well get an album out of it first. And that's how we got the album Drugs in 2001. It was never meant to be a complete project, and you can tell by how diverse it sounds. Regardless, it contains some of his most popular songs to date, with some even gaining popularity on TikTok in recent years. After Drugs, Aphex Twin wouldn't release another project for over a decade, until he finally put out Cyro in 2014. Cyro would go on to win him a Grammy, which, unsurprisingly, he didn't bother showing up for.
For Best Dance Electronic Album, the nominees are Aphex Twin, Deadmau5, Little Dragon, Röyksopp and Robin, Matt Zoe.
And the Grammy goes to... This Grammy goes to Zero, Aphex Twin. The winners are not here. Again, I thought I saw them coming. Sorry about that. We, on the behalf of the Academy and myself, thank you. We're pleased to receive this award. Thank you so much.
Since then, Richard has released a compilation in 2015 and has put out a lot of music under aliases on SoundCloud, but we haven't gotten another album from the man, the myth, the legend. I couldn't cover every single thing there is about Aphex Twin in one video, but I hope that the message is clear. Richard D. James has shown us what happens when an artist creates for themselves. He didn't follow any rules. He never tried to appeal. He created a new language for electronic music, one that still sounds experimental and inventive decades later. He's the most influential artist the genre has ever seen, which is why his logo alone is instantly recognizable unrecognizable to millions. His music was unpredictable, unsettling, but strangely beautiful. None of it was designed for fame or radio or the charts. He refused to play the commercial game. He worked on his own time, in his own way, making whatever the hell he felt like, whether the world was ready for it or not. He's a reminder that what matters most is the act of creating. Because at the end of the day, Aphex Twin just loves making music, and in doing so, he changed the world.